Okay, so we're happy to take questions from the audience, absolutely, and that includes the virtual audience as well. But I want to just kind of start off by saying many of you have mentioned climate change, and of course, along with habitat destruction, it's one of the biggest threats to plant survival in the Neotropics and globally for that matter. In your own research and in your travels, where do you see hope in neotropical plant conservation and plants' abilities to survive in their changing climates? Anyone is welcome to answer.
No, before.
Okay, so I see hope where people around the forest really love the forest and want to conserve it because there's so many economic need in this area. And if you don't love the forest, it's very difficult for to just put some money in and try to make, you do the numbers, and if your heart is not there, it's not going to be, there's not going to be much conservation. But that's my hopeful talk. Sure. Great, because I have lots of hours to talk about the non-hopeful ones.
No doubt, no doubt. Go ahead, John.
I guess this is on. My hope is long-term. From looking at the evolution of life on Earth, species are always changing. And I'm looking forward to the de-evolution of one species on the planet. We know it will happen. We may have to wait a while. But I see all around me species moving into new habitats, species moving up mountainsides, species and interactions changing on a daily basis to new circumstances. They'll continue to do that. And if we also think what happened after the dinosaurs, suddenly we have mammals, we have birds, we have a whole new plant flora that came about. So we may have to wait a little while, and that's my hopeful. We might. When I say we, I'm thinking about nature.
Yeah. The planet might have to wait a little. Paula, did you have?
Yes. So I don't think the whole landscape is very hopeful, to be honest, especially for the Andean region, because even before we started talking about climate change, we only had like 10% of the natural vegetation left in the inter-Andean valleys. So we have very little. So I see hope in restoration projects. I think we have to work big time in bringing things back and keeping the things that are there connected, so species can really find places where to thrive.
Absolutely. Any questions from the audience?
I want to say, can I also?
Yes, absolutely, sorry.
So, I want to say two hopes. I know the landscape, and when you are in the field, it's amazing how you go to a place and you have to know if you can come back to that place. But I'm hopeful for the students and all the energy and all the curiosity that you see in Latin America about nature and about studying nature. This was something that we talked this morning during breakfast. That there was an article out there saying that botanists were disappearing, and there's a lot of concern. But when you are in the tropics, and I think this works maybe for other countries besides Latin America, you find that students, like young people, read to diversity, go into botany. They get super excited when you give workshops. We always have to cap the workshops because there are always more people who want to participate. The problem is the money and how you support those students to keep their careers and have jobs in their country. So that's what I see hope with the young generation, willing to study more and look at conservation alternatives.
That's a really good point, and it brings me to actually the question in the audience. Yeah, go ahead. You have to come to the mic, please.
Well, I have a question to ask, but I was going to wait. Why don't you make your point first?
I was going to ask another question, so go ahead.
Okay, so my question relates somewhat to money. One of the things that I notice about the difficulty of doing botany in the montane tropics in particular is that the area is just so rugged and so difficult to get around in. Do you think that there's a future perhaps for using drones to assist with collection or other? Apparently, I'm not the only person who thought of this particular question.
Last year there was an interesting talk about using drones to collect plants from like cliff faces.
In Hawaii.
Yeah, in Hawaii, and I think that probably it would be a useful tool for collecting in a lot of circumstances. But I mean, you can maybe speak that how feasible it would be to use some of the forests in Colombia, or I mean, I think along water courses you might, there'd be possibility to like kind of feasibly collect, but so yeah, it seems promising, but there's also a lot of challenges, I would imagine.
Yes, I think they could help. Have limitations because it's working.
You kind of got to get close.
Okay, works? Okay. I think it can help, but it has limitations because sometimes the canopy is extremely close. So there is no way you can navigate that. And don't forget that in the mountains, we cannot use radios, you cannot use many things that are remote control because you're just isolated, you lose signals so easily.
If I can make a comment about drones, there's a lot of interest in the genomic world. In fact, there was an X Prize, if anybody follows the X Prize, to develop a system to select or to collect tissue samples in out-of-the-way places. We're talking about millions of dollars to do this, but you made such an excellent point that collecting a tissue sample is really knowing nothing about what you've collected. You may be able to assign it to a sequence, maybe get it to a genus, but in terms of plant-animal interactions, in terms of everything else, or in terms of taxonomy, it's a very short-term, limited approach to understanding biodiversity from my perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It could tell you what you don't know necessarily. That might be something that's undescribed and otherwise unknown. So there's diversity out there, but we sort of already know that.
But I'm hopeful. Oh, it doesn't like me, is it? More? I see the potential, and I will say that if there are engineers or students willing to kind of try and see how it can work better for collecting rhizomes or things that are really attached, for example, to the substrate, I will encourage them. And I think collaboration, again, it's, I think, a key word. And so I do see hope in drones, and I think some places might be easier, they might be easier to use than others. But for epiphytes in some forests, it would be great to have and not to have to climb. I mean, as when you go to the field and you have to climb, you climb 1 or 2 trees a day and then you're exhausted, right? So maybe with binoculars and drones that I will totally, if somebody wants to bring their drone and kind of develop a more suitable approach to collect, I will be happy to just give it a try.
It's very frustrating when the thing you're trying to collect is beyond the perimeter reach, and so anything to give you a few extra feet could be, valuable.
I remember when we were just happy using slingshots and shotguns to get things.
We've got another question from the audience here.
Yeah, I think I have a question for Paula. I was shocked. I'm following up with the question Pedro asked about how many, the proportion 50% of the genera with one species. That's so shocking from my experience of walking into the forest in different regions. I wonder if this is more of a Andean type of forest phenomena. Or another thing is, I wonder if it's the data, it's biased because you have so many orchidaceae genera If you exclude the orchids, what would the percentage to be? Because I was recently in the Philippines, we collected, my God, the number one family was orchidaceae, and each time we only found one individual for that species. I mean, we tried so hard in the forest, one individual.
No, that is a very good idea. Actually,
Just move your hand up a little bit, there you go.
that is, yes. That is a very good idea. It is quite shocking. I also think there aren't that many studies that deal with this gradient, that deal with two hotspots on the same place, and that deal with this general region and with a balanced approach to collecting. Because many of the things that we know in botany come from rapid transects that are just targeting trees, it's targeting like bigger woody plants. I'm always this person that is looking at the small things and things that are on the ground to figure out what's up there. And I think it's just bringing out a different perspective. I don't have a good explanation for this, unfortunately, because I don't have anything to compare to.
This sort of connects to something that Alejandro was talking about, which is plasticity in some species or some genera where you might have many, many species that have been named because there's so much morphological diversity versus a situation where you might have a longer lived species, which maybe has spread in different areas or has sustained in one area without diversifying. And I wonder, maybe you could speak to this sort of, what are maybe some pressures or some reasons why you might see extreme plasticity in some groups and very little plasticity in other groups? It's a big question.
Well, I think I'll say right away, some of the plasticity may be a bit of our own artifact of not quite understanding what's happening in these things. And if we look over time, taxonomists have always looked at wide variation, but the more closely they look, they often find that indeed that's plasticity as much as it's speciation or some other such thing. But also what we found in the Zingiberales is things are evolving at all different sorts of rate. And there's some, like particularly ferns, which are in many cases ancient. There are these long lineages where many angiosperm groups, and I think orchids is one, that are recent diversifications. You're just going to have that plasticity because of the process of evolution.
Well, I also think that many times when you cite Amazon-based studies, you cite, the Amazon is huge, and you usually cite the flatlands. But when you get close to the Andes in the northwestern Amazon, the picture is a bit different, and it's really, the diversity is pretty high. But I agree with you. I have to say that my best case scenario when I go to the field is that someone look at trees while I look at everything else, because that's not, I just don't look up, just look where my eyes go.
At least a couple of you mentioned the sort of application to the public of some of your research and thinking about how we can share information both through iNaturalist or through art exhibits, that kind of thing, that are related to the fieldwork that you do in your research. I'm wondering if you could speak to the power and the value of sharing your research in public forums such as those.
Okay, let's see if I figure this microphone out. So it might be the hand, right? I have a love-hate relationship with outreach, I have to say, because like I always say, time is limited. And I think outreach efforts are very important. But of course, if you focus your time in that, you are going to have to drop something. And normally is research, right? But I think it's important, and I think it's important to have a team where at least some people devote their time to do outreach, and that we as a community of researchers or of scientists recognize that effort too. which is important in evaluations, right? But I do think there is a big power on outreach, because I do think there's no other way that the whole community can understand what we do if we don't do outreach. And I think it's both ways. Sometimes when you start these outreach efforts, you just feel that as a scientist, you're giving out but when you see the reaction of the public and the connections that you can make, and the way you see when people understand what you do and the importance, then you get back also that energy. I was like, oh, maybe this is something that it's also important for other people. It's just not my passion that we love plants, we love to go to a field. But it's great to see when other sectors of the communities also get interested or understand. Sometimes it's very difficult, right? All of us do, or many of us probably do a lot of outreach with stakeholders and donors, and it's very difficult to get the message out there. But when you see a spark on this banker that came to visit your garden, and you just can see that you can get in because probably they went to an art exhibition when they were young, or they went and visited a botanical garden, and they have this in their mind, I think is great. And so I think it's both ways, and I think it's just powerful, and we need to do it, or we need to have at least a team that has someone that do it.
Well, what I think, okay. So for a long time, I thought what I did, people just found weird, and I couldn't get across them, my excitement, that they just thought I was a weirdo that went to the forest. But recently, I hung out with someone that knows a lot more about plants than I would ever do. And he just tells the stories about plants at lunch with anyone. And people are fascinated about hearing the stories about plants. So I started to do the same. And just, when you're at lunch with your high school friends, in Colombia that happens because we live in the same city where we grew up, and people are just fascinated to learn more about plants. And with everyone besides you, or with the school, the parents of my son, when we're good to meetings, even if we don't do something that is specifically outreach, as doing like workshops at a high school close by, of course, love to do more of that. And the other aspect so we have, even talking with pride, with a lot more pride about what we do in general, to the general public that is close by. And the other aspect is the beauty of botanical gardens, and the beauty of telling the stories behind the plants that are in the botanical gardens, and bringing them to people, because people are interested in learning. I went to the botanical garden with my family members, and things that I teach every week, they were just surprised and excited about it. My sister is a famous lawyer, and she was like, oh, how exciting. And I was like, wonderful, we have to do more of this to just everyone around us.
Paola, did you want to answer that as well, or John?
Just very quickly to add on what Alejandro just said, I think it's important for us scientists to get better training, or train ourselves to be better storytellers. We have to use social media tools, blogging, and it would be ideal for universities to do their part and give us some pointers, because we have to improvise and we learn when we are very old. So that is important to incorporate that into our toolkit.
Let me add to that. besides Botanic Gardens, don't forget natural history museums, where we sit right now and have a great opportunity to educate about all of nature and all of natural history. The other thing I think, besides the training, which is really important, which most scientists do not have training in public outreach, but also incentives. If you're in a university, your incentive is to teach. In a place like this, we need more incentives for scientists to actually speak out and some rewards to do that, as opposed to just out of the goodness of our heart and our love of nature. We should be encouraged to do it as part of our jobs. And some of us are, and some of us that's written in, but maybe not as much as it should be.
Well, I'm just going to say, of course, natural history museums, but hopefully they'll have more planned exhibitions.
Our director is sitting right there.
I love it. This is changing topics entirely. Collectively and individually, you all have a very rich experience in studying the neotropical flora. I'm wondering if you have thoughts about what are the next areas that really need to be explored in the neotropics that maybe are underexplored or underrepresented in natural history collections. What are those hotspots or understudied places that we really need to get to?
I'll just mention that I think we'll learn a lot about the neotropical flora if we look at the fossil record more. And I think there's been a lot of recent paleobotanical work, especially in northern South America, or other parts of Argentina and Colombia, that really, I think, drastically changes our view of the evolution of the flora. And we see lineages there that now are only found in the old world. And so I think looking at the fossil record, especially in Mexico, where it hasn't been studied that well, will kind of enrich our understanding of the evolutionary history of the region. But obviously, studying the living diversity there is important as well. So I'll turn it over for you all to speak to that.
Okay, so obviously, I think the next hot thing is Western Colombia in general. I do invite people to there and to make connections. I think it's very important for institutions in the US, abroad, to get more active, because there are many more things that can be done and should be done. And even though if some areas are still dangerous or hard to work with, there are lots of wonderful Colombians and botanists that are working there every day. They are very valuable collections that are not getting seen and are not getting studied. So another thing that I believe is the next frontier is to have more jobs in botany, because we have lots of botanists and we need more jobs.
Well, I'm going to, answering your question, I'm going to say that in the emerald forest, it's on top of a coal resource. So you walk through the forest and you see fossils all the time. So you're welcome to come. You're also invited to come. And I also think that the Amazon has to be explored much more. So, and we need to really be, the Amazon is too large. There are places that we have not been to, and there are places that would be river and walk long distance to get to, but it certainly, there are many places that we haven't visited, and it would be amazing. We also need a lot of specialists in a lot of groups, that many of these lists and long lists just have a lot of, half of the flora is in debt. So how much of that we would like to know more about, and how much we would learn by understanding the species that are not so common. So in the Amazon, there have been people working about those species that are very common. How many stories we have to say about the ones that are not common?
So in the, okay, hello, 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 it doesn't work. Where should I put my hand? Hello? No? No?
You're good. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay, it's because I cannot hear myself. So in the Fern team, when we get together to plan the expeditions, we have a list of places that we want to go, and it keeps growing and growing, and it's, of course, outside of Colombia as well. So as fern specialists, we always look at the mountains, and Alejandra is right that the Amazon needs to be explored more. The problem with the Amazon, at least for ferns, is that you have to get to many places that are far away and the diversity might be lower. So we still go for the mountains. So if you ask me, I'll say the mountains of Peru, because I don't want to be only in Colombia. And I will love if we could just explore a little bit more the region that is in between, or the border in between Venezuela and Colombia, and also the border in between Mexico, like northern Mexico and US, but towards the east. So Nuevo León and León, that's just a very promising site, at least for us.
Great, thanks so much. I think we're at time here. So I want to thank our speakers once again. We are going to have some closing remarks. So Eric's going to come back up and introduce our last speaker.
Could I say one more thing, not about a particular place that we need to focus on, but I think what I've seen over the last number of decades is infatuation with different technologies that takes us away from kind of what basic botany is about. Ed Wilson once called it the infatuation with the macromolecule. And so many, at least in the US, so much emphasis is put on lab work now that getting into the field is de-emphasized, and often, I mean, I'm glad to see everything you're doing, but I think we need to move into the future with a balanced approach that one thing is not going to answer and help us understand how nature works. And we have to keep up the field work, and particularly in Las Orquídeas, but we also have to balance that with new technologies and new ways to analyze things. But I think balance is the key that I would like to emphasize.
Great, thanks so much, Sean. And I just want to thank the speakers again, and also my colleagues here at Natural History in the Botany Department and at Smithsonian Gardens for helping organize this.